Gamification reminds us that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing it the fun way. Now, games and scoring systems are enjoyable because they produce dopamine. When dopamine is released, it enhances our mood, positive outlook, motivation, and goal setting, all great things for our mental health. For those of us with ADHD, we tend to have lower dopamine levels in the brain naturally, and dopamine actually depletes faster because it gets reabsorbed quicker. Now, dopamine isn't just a reward chemical, it's also a motivation chemical. If we want to do something that's taxing, we need to have enough dopamine to be able to get started, and enough dopamine to see it through to the end. The tricky part is that our brains are amazing at judging whether an activity is rewarding enough before we can find the motivation to do it. So if you want to establish a habit, it better have some dopamine attached to it. Hi and welcome if you're new here. My name's Abby Garrard. I'm a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist, and I help people feel better for a living. So let's jump into our topic today. Let's dive into some real life examples. My house is filled with whimsical things, and I'm a big fan of replacing boring items with their fun counterparts. I use a lot of timers, particularly visual timers, and initially I had this very serious timer with bright red lights, and it made me feel like I was sitting an exam. So I sent it back and I got this whimsical one. It's delightful and I love using it, especially when I'm working on my most serious tasks, because it reminds me not to take everything so seriously. And it's also hard to feel stressed about a tax deadline when you're looking at that cloud little face. I also bring elements of fun into my to-do list. This technique is from the Anti-Planner by Danny Donovan. She's not a sponsor, but I'm so happy to shout about her because this is the Bible of gamification, as well as really good strategies that work for ADHD brains. So I'll put a link to this in the show notes. So this is my hit list. I reserve it for things that I need big motivation for. I'm a visual person, I sketch out my nemesis, and then when I finish, I get to stamp the page through with a pencil, and it's so satisfying. Another thing I do is I hate cooking, and I never remember what I can make. So I made myself a fancy menu and even wrote takeaway options on there because those are valid meals too. Another thing is I tend to write a lot of paper notes in my client sessions, and I found that shredding them wasn't as satisfying, so I actually prefer to burn my notes. Not only is it so beautiful to watch, but it also feels more like a ceremony, and sometimes I'll throw in this powder that makes the colours look really beautiful as a kind of ceremonial send-off. And lastly, I've even gamified things that I was dreading. I call this one Bad Day Bingo. I came up with it back in my corporate days when I worked as an HR consultant. So I loved my job, but we'd had a really bad week and morale was really low. So I came up with Bad Day Bingo. I printed one off for each of us and said, let's write down the 9 things that you don't want to have to deal with today. And whoever gets to tick off all 9 of them by the end of the day can get the Prosecco in the fridge. So I wrote down all the things that I didn't want to have to deal with that day. There was a client that we had at the time, a corporate client, was so rude to us every time we spoke to them. So I wrote his name on there. I wrote having a complicated legal question that I didn't have an immediate answer to. It felt like a small victory ticking them off, and around the room people were cheering when they were getting nearer the finish line. And at the end of the day I got a call from that corporate client and I've never been so happy to speak with him. So when I say you'll be surprised at what you can gamify, I really mean it. Bad Day Bingo also works remotely. You can play it with friends over text. In fact, I have a template for Bad Day Bingo. You can download it in the show notes. I often print these off for clients and write it down, then we tick them off. It's great. So I want to challenge you to do something fun with a task that you usually hate. Gamification isn't just about tricking yourself into doing things. It's also about bringing fun back into your life. But since I'm a therapist, I also want to address the elephant in the room. There is a cultural narrative that if you are doing something in a fun or whimsical way, that means that you're not really an adult. And it's so easy to get stuck there, as I have done so many times, as being an adult means you have to do things in a boring way. So don't be surprised if this shame-inducing narrative pops up whenever you come up with an idea that makes you smile. It doesn't mean you should stop, and this is why I've adopted the belief that anything worth doing is worth doing the fun way. Fun and rewards are fuel for your brain, so why wouldn't you give that to yourself? So I hope I've convinced you to try gamification, or at least gently challenged you. You are allowed to gamify whatever you like in your life. It's your life, so you may as well try and do it the fun way, wherever possible. So if you're feeling inspired, don't forget to like and subscribe, and please leave me a comment. Let me know what you've done to gamify your life. I'd love to read about it. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll catch you next time.